This is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jenn Vogel. Join Jenn and her guests for this live discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Also available on podcast channels. This live stream is presented to you by Vox Pop Me, the leader in video research. Here's today's live conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show. We are live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and the podcast version will be available on podcast channels soon. Today, I'm very excited to chat with Rand Fishkin, founder of Moz and now Spark Toro. He launched Spark Toro to help you identify your customers' biggest sources of influence and the hidden gems so you can reach them where they hang out. Welcome, very special welcome to Real Talk, Rand.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. Great to be here.
Really excited for this conversation. Everybody, bear with me. I'm fangirling a little. I'm very excited to have this conversation with Rand today. So if I seem a little weird, I am.
For little old me, I don't understand why.
Totally. I'm totally a fan. So I'm very excited to have you on the show today.
That's far too good.
Well, so now you are very well known for launching Moz. And, for those of you in the audience who haven't read Rand's book, Lost and Founder, there's a lot of good learnings and honesty from that book. And I'd love just a little bit about what you learned from that experience. I'm sure there's a lot to distill down into just a couple of minutes, but what did you learn from that experience in launching Moz?
Yeah, so it was a very long journey, right? I have this weird experience of essentially dropping out of college, working with my mom, who ended up being my co-founder at Moz, on the business that would become that company. Initially was a web design company, then it became an SEO consulting company, and then obviously an SEO software company in its later stages. And I was there for, like I said, 17 years. So it essentially encompasses all of the learnings that I've had as a human being outside of childhood, right? And that means, every mistake you could possibly imagine. Financial mistakes, management mistakes, hiring and recruiting mistakes, product strategy mistakes, customer research mistakes. We made them. I made them. I never worked anywhere else. And I actually really regret that. I think that in retrospect, what I wish I had done with my career is spent some time at a few other companies. I don't know, Jen, your entire employment history, but I feel like there is, even if you have terrible experiences at companies, you learn a lot. You grow a lot as a person from experiencing, what does a good manager do? What does a bad manager do? What does a good CEO look like? What does a bad one look like? What does a good leadership team? How do you build that? And I didn't have any of those. So I was starting from scratch every time I did it. And I will say this, I sort of opened Lost and Founder with this kind of video game analogy. I don't know if you play video games, but if you do, you have this experience when you play a video game that the first time, you're fighting the monsters and, jumping around or whatever it is, and you're just, losing every single time and starting over. And then as you play through, you get better, right? You see a scary monster in the video game, you stop panicking and you start reacting the way you're supposed to, right? And you logically, your brain sort of manages that stress and discomfort, and you figure out ways to work through the problem. And running a company is a lot like that. It's really, really similar. Obviously the length and the degree to which you are having fun and enjoying yourself is different, potentially. But that is my big takeaway, right? That the first few times you encounter a problem, those sorts of spikes in cortisol levels and panic and stress, and that initial incorrect reaction that's your instinct takes over. And if you can fight through that if you can encounter that problem several times or learn the tactics, right? Read the strategy guide. Oh, you're encountering this monster for the first time? Don't worry about it. You just go to the left and you go around the back and you hit the bad guy there. Great. And this is just like, a product strategy problem. Oh, you're seeing that your product is interacting with customers in this certain way and they are not resonating with new features. You go back to this process, right? And here's how to have the kinds of productive conversations and ask the right questions and run the right surveys and send the right emails to be able to get at the core of why these features aren't working for you. And maybe it's a positioning problem. Maybe it's a marketing problem. Maybe it's a communication problem. Perhaps it's actually a feature and functionality problem. Maybe it's a user interface issue. No one's discovering it. And you can suss those out if you know what to look for. I didn't know what to look for, so I just ran into the room with the big monster and panicked.
That does sound a little scary, but I feel like regardless of, you mentioned you wish you had worked for some other companies, like regardless of where your experience comes from, it is experience, and those problems will come up over and over again. And you do have references, you build up references as you go of how to handle them, and the mistakes that you made last time and doing things a little different, regardless of where that experience comes from. Hopefully each time you encounter that problem, you're doing it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? Is that it's not merely, I think one of the challenges we have as human beings, especially leaders, right? So, Jen, if you're put into a leadership role, whether that's just a manager of a few people or leading a team or leading an entire company, there is a natural inclination to double down on this idea that you're in charge, and so therefore your decisions are correct. And so you seek out data and information and stories that try and put you in the best light. And if you've made mistakes, you don't own up to them and talk about them, with emotional intelligence and with regret and thoughtfulness. You double down on the idea that this mistake was not a mistake. It was intentional, right? You're trying to make yourself look at, this is particularly pernicious, I think, in sort of the historically masculine culture of, American business. Like, there's just this idea of not showing weakness, of like always projecting strength. When you think of sort of the most famous entrepreneurs and CEOs, they're not the kind of people who thoughtfully express empathy and regret for their decisions. They're the kind of people who are like, I did you can too if you follow my 7 steps. I hate that crap.
That feels like a topic we could spend a lot of time on.
Oh, sure, yes. Toxic masculinity. I look forward to this discussion.
Totally.
We'll be in conversation all week.
Yeah, welcome to our rabbit hole.
Yeah. Things our fathers taught us that they really shouldn't have.
Everything we learned in kindergarten that we should have thrown away. I love it. So maybe we'll get back on track. So, I mean, with everything that you learned from all your experience at Moz and throughout your adult life, what prompted you to now start Spark Toro, and kind of what have you done differently with this launch?
Yeah. So let's see. First part of that question. Spark Toro is essentially an idea born from a problem that I couldn't solve at Moz. So for those of you who are familiar with web marketing and digital marketing, right, there's lots of channels and tactics and options, but Moz was specifically in the SEO space, right? Helping people with search engine optimization, which is essentially ranking organically one way or another in Google's results of any kinds, right? So how do I show up at the top of Google without paying them money to be in the paid search results? And that is a remarkable marketing channel. It's truly awesome if your customers and potential customers and community are already searching for the thing or things that you do. But often the case, right? In many times, I think the live stream's just a little behind. But in many cases, the reality is no one is looking for this precise product, right? No one's looking for exactly what you have to offer. And so you need to essentially reach your customers not through search as a channel, but through some other methodology, through some source of influence that they already pay attention to. And uncovering those sources is really difficult. Like if you want to figure out, for example, you mentioned in the intro, Jen, if you are, let's say you're an engineering firm and you've come up with an amazing new product for architects. And so you want to reach a lot of architects with this fancy new product, but architects don't search for it because it's never existed before. It's new. Yeah. And so do architects even search for the problem that they have, or do they think they know how to solve it, or they don't even know to look for that? This is a real challenge, right? That's a marketing conundrum that search cannot solve. And Facebook ads or Instagram or something like that are going to be extraordinarily expensive because there's tons and tons of people bidding to be in front of that audience anyway. So what you really want to do is you want to find out, okay, maybe there are podcasts that architects listen to on a regular basis. Maybe there's trade journals that they read and follow and visit. Maybe there's social accounts that are popular in the architectural world. Maybe there's websites that are like really well known to them. Maybe there's an event series that I could participate in, or like a hashtag that they use weekly on Instagram and Twitter that I could, amplify my product to there. That would be awesome if only you knew those things. And unfortunately, the classic market research process for this is surveys and interviews, which are terrible at revealing sources of influence. Because if you ask an architect, hey, tell me about some podcasts you listen to, they'll be like, oh yeah, this murder mystery one.
Yeah.
I know. Like what about in architecture world? Yeah, I've heard of this one or two. All right, well, what percent has really reached those? How many people do we need to interview and survey to get that? It's going to be very difficult to get that kind of data, especially at scale with any statistical significance. And so Casey and I, my co-founder and I, had this idea like, wait a minute. People already on their public, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube, like they have all these accounts. Many of them will say, I'm an X, right? So thousands and thousands of people online are like, oh, I'm an architect at this firm. Great. What if we could crawl that public profile, just like Google does, and then look at all the things that they publicly share and link to and follow and amplify and talk about, and then aggregate all that data together so that you could see, oh, okay, well, of the 12,492 architects that we could find in our database, 19% have engaged with this ArchiNect Sessions podcast in the last 3 months. Okay, that's probably, there you go, 19% of online architects engage with that podcast. I bet it has probably pretty substantial listenership among professional architects in the US. Great, right? So this is where the idea for SparkToro came from.
That's amazing. I'm a big fan of the platform. I was lucky enough to be invited as an early beta user.
Yes, you signed up. That's right.
I did sign up, and I've been using it for probably over a year. And exactly what you were saying, like I can rank number one for a keyword that has no search volume.
Oh, I rank for so many keywords with no search volume.
Yeah, I mean, that is like, easy to do actually, but doesn't actually benefit you in any way, shape, or form. And, being able to identify the topics that people talk about, where they live on the internet. And like you were saying, like, you can't really ask people because, a lot of it is subconscious, right? Like I'm scrolling through stuff. There's people I follow and I pay attention to what they say on Twitter, but I couldn't tell you what their name is, and there's just so much content out there.
Yeah, right. And you're just not going to get that. You'll generally get all sorts of bias baked into the answer to that question. and trying to ask people to give you those answers in a survey and give you more than 2 or 3 of them, really, really difficult. Whereas, if you get this data from thousands of public profiles, or tens of thousands, depending on your audience size, you can really, really dig into, the gritty details of the numbers and say like, oh yeah, okay, we could advertise in a popular, whatever, website like Wired or something, or Mashable, right? And okay, well, like 17% of our architects, have visited one of those websites or shared one of those websites. Okay, that's not terrible. But what if we could find something that is hyper specific in our space, that's paid attention to by even more, and the advertising rates are even cheaper, or they take guest editorials, or we can do co-marketing, or I could pitch to speak at one of their events, or be a guest on their podcast, or whatever it is. There's just a lot of opportunity, unexecuted marketing opportunity in those spaces, because it's really hard to discover those sources. And this is, frankly, Google and Facebook have in their duopoly, control of advertising interest. They do not want this data to be known, right? Because what they hope is everyone will just keep spending money with them more and more every quarter, and they'll keep bidding up advertising rates. And the more they can get people to participate in their sort of ecosystem, the higher those advertising costs go, because there's more demand and there's only a fixed amount of supply. In fact, that's what's happened over the last year during the pandemic. That's why their profits have been skyrocketing, because a lot of other, especially sort of in real life, outdoor, traditional TV, traditional radio, traditional print, that's all going away. And so those ad opportunities are flowing to Facebook and Google. Mm-hmm. But if you can break free from that ecosystem, you can build up a tremendous competitive advantage in marketing.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you're you and your co-founder are running Spark Toro a little differently than Moz, and I've heard you describe Spark Toro as the goal of Spark Toro is to be a zebra as opposed to a unicorn. I'd love to hear, from your own words, what that means. What's the difference?
Yeah, so unicorn has this classic venture capital meaning, at least in startup culture. So the idea is a unicorn is a startup that has been valued by its investors at $1 billion or greater. And the reason that venture capitalists care so much about kind of that particular number is that they are looking for exceptional returns on a very small number of their investments. So if you're a venture capitalist, say you and I, Jen, we start a venture capital firm. We'll call it REELTALK Investors. And REELTALK Investors, we're going to put on our vests, with the little logo over here, and we're going to get our tall iced drinks, and we're going to walk into a bunch of family offices for super wealthy people and endowment funds at colleges and these kinds of things. And we're going to pitch them on why, if you give your money to Jen and Rand, we will take, $300 million, and we will beat the market's rate of return by investing in a bunch of early stage companies. We'll invest in probably 250, maybe 300 companies over the course of 7 to 10 years. And of those 300 companies we put money into, 290 will basically be worthless. They'll die, they'll fall apart, they'll go bankrupt, they're nothing. But the 10 remaining, 5 or 6 of those, hopefully, will have big returns, 5 to 10x returns. So we'll put in $20 million and hopefully we'll get out $100 million from that. And 2 or 3 of those companies, if we're lucky, right, if we're a great fund, will be worth, $1 billion or more, and they'll return 100 million plus. They'll basically make the whole fund for us. This is the model of venture capital, right? The entire structure and system, it's essentially set up as a big tax dodge. In the 60s and 70s, a bunch of VCs lobbied the federal government to get the capital gains rate brought down, blah, blah, blah. But thanks to this tax dodge, you can invest money in early stage companies, and you pay very little, even no taxes on your first like $10 million of gain in a company. And the idea behind this is that for whatever reason, right, the statistical belief in that industry is 95% of companies will die, a few will be worth $1 billion, and those will be the unicorns, right, that we're all seeking, we're all going after. And I think, and Casey thinks, a lot of people think, this model is super, super unhealthy, right? It very obviously, I think one of the most obvious things it does is deeply contributes to income inequality, right? If you are having, 295 companies, 290 companies fail, and one or two companies make $1 billion, guess what you're doing, right? You're essentially saying like, okay, more money for the 0.01%, nothing for the 99.9%. That sucks. I hate that. I don't want to participate in that world. That sounds bad to me. You also sort of further monopoly power and control, right? Because a venture capitalist is really looking for a new entrant that's going to be the, Airbnb, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, of its field. They don't want competition. They want one player that they've invested in to own the whole field. That's really where those big wins come from. And I don't think that's a great thing either. So that's what Moz tried to be, right? I wanted Moz to be, and I was working hard, raised $30 million, built it to 50 million in revenue a year, was hoping to get to, that $1 billion valuation someday. And there's a lot of problems with that model. It's not great for a ton of people, including employees and customers. It's not super great. And so with SparkToro, there's a great group of folks. I believe it is. So let's see. There's 4 women behind it. This movement, I think it started with an essay called "Sex and Startups," and it's a great read. I highly recommend it. But they talk about this idea of zebras rather than unicorns, right? So essentially, sustainable, long-term companies that can run and make their employees and their customers and their community happier, better places by their existence. And that really, really appeals to me. So yeah, you can look it up, but we're trying to build a zebra company that we can work at for a long time, that has a low odds of failure rather than teeny, tiny odds of becoming $1 billion company.
So it's really more about like consistent growth and customer and employee value, as opposed to rapid 10x returns.
Yeah, it's sort of the anti-blitz scaling philosophy, right? Slow and steady, happy to be the tortoise. Get to $1 million in revenue, we're happy with that. If it's 10 or 50, hey, that's wonderful too, right? We're not going to complain, but we are satisfied at whatever size SparkToro can reach, and we will keep improving the product and stick to the mission rather than feeling pressured to find a way, no matter how, to either become a $1 billion unicorn or die trying.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So how did you first bring SparkToro to market?
It was a significant process. I'm sort of I'm a contrarian on a bunch of things, Jen, and one of those is the idea of the MVP. Are you familiar with this? Right. So Eric Ries's Lean Startup book kind of popularized this concept of a minimum viable product, and the concept is you launch something that's really crappy, but does a bare minimum job of kind of solving the customer pain point problem so that you can prove and validate whether you have a good product idea. And there's a lot of good things about this, right? Because you can do it hopefully very quickly. You don't have to invest a ton if you've made a mistake, right? And there is no demand for this product, or this problem isn't as painful as you thinking goes into it. But there's also a big problem, and that problem is if you launch a minimum viable product, many people, and many people see it for the first time, they will remember their experience with that product. They will not, longer term in the future kind of go, oh, I see that this is a promising product and someday it could be great. And so let me give the team time and, we'll see where they get with this. That's not how people think, right? If the first Tesla was terrible, would Elon Musk really have gotten all the sort of government loans and all the positive press and all the he's a genius? No, they would have been like, well, he's a crazy person. This was to be expected. And, I think it's still kind of a miracle that that it runs at all. But this is the philosophy that we took to heart, right? We realized that SparkToro, by virtue of the fact that lots and lots of people in the marketing universe sort of know me already and follow me and pay attention to me on whatever social channels and had subscribed to get the, like yourself, right? You had signed up for the beta list to be in SparkToro when it launched. And we invited you to the beta. We knew that we had to build a product that from day one was robust and impressive. And so we did a couple of things. First off, we did a lot of validation that our theory that if you aggregate all of this public social data, you can actually get out useful results. That was kind of the first task. That was probably the first 6-9 months to build up a database like that and then to start running queries against it and see if we could get there. And then we had a lot of product iteration over the next sort of 6 months. And then we did a beta. And I think you were part of the beta that started in the fall of 2019, maybe summer 2019, fall of 2019. We did 2 rounds of that beta, inviting several hundred folks to come play with and try the product for free. And I don't know if you remember that first version, but it looked and felt completely different. Like the UI and UX was totally different. We got a lot of feedback about that. And over the holidays at the end of 2019, we basically made our big change. And then 2020, we're almost ready in February to launch. And then there was this coronavirus case at a nursing home near us. And so that, it threw a monkey wrench in so many people's plans and hopes, but, cost a tremendous number of lives. So it's just unimaginable tragedy, but also, as far as it relates to SparkToro, really put a damper on our thoughts about launching. So we delayed our launch a couple of months and then finally did launch in April. But by that point, thankfully, we had a lot of great feedback and input and a bunch of iterations. We hired some consultants, Elevate Consultants, which is Claire Sulentrop and Georgiana Laudy, and they helped us run that beta process and analyze a lot of that feedback, take that to heart, fix things up. And so when we launched, it only took, I think it took 4 months from April, 5 months to September. We sort of were able to grow fast enough to get to profitability and then have been operating it ever since. So we just celebrated our 1 year since launch.
Well, congratulations. That's very exciting. Yeah. It's so funny. So Gia Laudy was a guest on the show a couple months ago.
She's so smart.
She's the best and a great mentor to me and is who introduced me to SparkToro. And also, we now talk about her pretty much every other show. So
and here she is again.
Yes, here she is again. I'm so glad you mentioned her. I'm curious, how much of the queries that you were running when you were building this product, how much of that was designed for you to launch your product to the market that you were interested in? Were you kind of, drinking your own champagne?
Yeah, definitely some. And one of the reasons that we did some validation in that little, in marketing universe is because we know it well. So we couldn't hide bad results. If I search for my audience frequently talks about architecture, or my audience uses these words in their profile, chemical engineer, I don't know anything about those worlds. They're just completely foreign to me, right? So I look at the results and I'm like, well, they seem reasonable. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be correct, but I don't know for sure. But when I do searches in Marketing Universe, I'm like, yep, that makes sense. And then, occasionally, hey, why is this one here? That doesn't make sense to me. Can we figure out what's causing that? Or, is there some root problem underlying this? That sort of thing. One of the problems we had early on was that, a lot of the accounts and sources of influence were like in the, I would say, like political and news world, which is what a lot of people do on their social profiles, right? Facebook, especially, Twitter, especially. And so had to do some controlling for that. We basically had to say, if an account or celebrities, right? If an account is globally popular, essentially, a high percent of all users follow, engage with, talk about a subject, a person, an organization, then we need to not show it by default in the results. And we need to look for what is unique about this audience that you searched for. And once we did that, the results just immediately became stellar. Like they just started looking great. Everything looked hyper relevant. You can, in fact, go into Spark Toro today. There's a filter where you can say include popular accounts, globally popular accounts. I think it's in the social and websites tab. And so if you want, you can click that and it'll be like, oh yeah, it's, Barack Obama and CNN and blah, blah. You're like, okay, yeah, sure. I guess lots of architects, pay attention to those people and publications, but that's not really what most people who are targeting are looking.
Yeah. Totally. And those like broader channels, you're going to reach the people that are more important to you, but also a bunch of other people that are maybe not.
Yeah, right. So like it is probably true that if you, run an ad in the New York Times, yeah, some architects will see it.
Right.
But is it worth your money, right? Like that, it's too broad a group. Unless you're sort of a big consumer product group company, just doesn't make sense. The targeting's off.
Yeah, totally. If you've got a really broad audience, it makes sense. But
sure,
otherwise, we're not going to spend the cost to advertise in the New York Times, most likely.
Yeah. It's like, you have a mortgage refinance. All right, your target is everybody with a mortgage. That's so broad, and there's no way to, this is one of Spark Toro's weaknesses. If you reach real estate agents, Spark Toro is great. If you want to reach homeowners, Spark Toro is kind of terrible. Right. Nobody says in their online profile, homeowner, right? That barely any identifiable online behaviors that could help separate someone who, owns their home versus rents. There's no identifiable behaviors for people who have paid off their mortgage versus haven't.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of kind of understanding those sources of influence of your customers when you do have a sort of identifiable target market, and how can companies use that information as a competitive advantage?
Oh, yeah. So I think this boils down to a whole bunch of kind of tactics and strategies and problems that you need to solve or that you are facing. And so Spark Toro is not everyone should subscribe to it. It's necessary for everyone. It's really a point solution when you have this problem. So if, for example, you are someone who says, our marketing engine is running just fine. I'm happy with our targeting. I feel like we do, a good job with all of the channels we invest in, and I'm not looking to change those up. What we really want to do is get more from the channels we already invest in. Could Spark Toro maybe be helpful? In a couple of places, right? If you're saying like, we want to optimize our Facebook ad spend, you could probably pop into Spark Toro, search for your audience, find them, look for hashtags that they might be using on Instagram or topics that they're paying attention to and talking about, Facebook pages that they're following, and then use those in your Facebook ad targeting. That's probably like a 1 month subscription, right? You just jump in, you do it one time, you jump out, maybe 6 months later, you do it again. But there's more pernicious long-term problems that other are solving with SparkToro, and it's really stuff around like market research and market strategy at the broad end of the spectrum, and then down to PR outreach, my content marketing and content strategy and targeting and all those kinds of things. And that is where, this data, no matter how you're getting it, you need it to answer these questions. If your challenge is, where should I reach my customers and potential customers outside of just Google and Facebook's ecosystem, so that three things can happen. One, so I can build a competitive advantage over folks who don't. Two, so that I can have marketing channels that are sending me traffic even when and value, even when I'm not, pouring dollars into these expensive ad platforms. And three, when I am better known in a space, right? So when you've heard of a product, heard of a brand, the ads work better too, right? So you get more return on investment by running an Instagram ad, a Facebook ad, a Google display ad, ranking in the Google search results, you name it. If people have heard of you, if they know you and like you and trust you, they're going to click on you. You're going to earn that engagement. You're going to earn those, essentially higher click-through rates and lower cost per click. So when you're doing those kinds of things, you need to build up that brand equity. And to do that, you can't do it through advertising alone, right? Unless you have a massive war chest and can, afford to do whatever, your Super Bowl sponsorship and, let's buy stadium naming rights in a few cities and that kind of stuff. But for most marketers, that is not a possibility. And so instead, what they have to do is go find specific targeted sources of influence that they know will reach their audience and invest in marketing of all kinds to reach them there. And so one of the things that a lot of folks do in SparkToro is we have this feature called lists, where you run through a search for several facets and variations of how your audience might describe themselves or their behaviors. And then you find, I like this podcast and I like these 3 YouTube channels. And I want to go after the hashtags. And these social accounts look really good to me. And these press sources, they look relevant. These websites, you add them all to a list. You sort of check boxes and then say add to list. And then that list populates with contact information, whatever, email addresses and social contact info. And then you can sort of export it and do whatever work you're going to do. That work could be, hey, we're going to target some ads at these folks. Or it could be, we're going to email these people, or we're going to DM them on Instagram, or we're going to send them a message on Twitter, or we're going to reach out to them on LinkedIn. We're going to get an introduction from our friend who knows them. Hey, Gia, Jen at REELTALK. Could you introduce me and see, maybe be a good podcast guest? That's not how this happened. I don't think. Maybe is that
No.
how this happened? No. Okay.
No, although if you didn't say yes, I might have called her. That might have been the second way to get you on.
But these are the kinds of, so it's used by podcast hosts and event organizers too, right? So they'll basically say, hey, I know that I want to reach this audience. How do I find guests that are followed and paid attention to by that audience? I can use SparkToro to see, okay, I want to reach CFOs in Canada, right? Chief financial officers in Canada, they follow, what's her name? Michelle from Clearbank, the founder, one of the co-founders of Clearbank. I think she was on the Canadian Shark Tank. Anyway, let's see if we can invite her on the show. Okay, Rand knows her. Obviously, you can't remember her last name off the cuff, which is really annoying. I think it's Romanow. That's what it is. Michelle Romanow. Okay, that's the kind of thing that is super useful to whatever, an event organizer who's looking to put together a great webinar or have a live stream, or bring someone to their YouTube channel who's going to get them to in front of the right audience. That's, that very tactical use of SparkToro.
Yeah, totally. And what you were saying about like your advertising is going to be more effective when people know who you are. Like that's exactly what I've used SparkToro for, is like that journey mapping and understanding like, where do I need to reach people when they have no awareness of us?
Yeah.
Or, where do I need to reach people when they do have some awareness of us, but they haven't quite engaged, and really mapping out that journey for all the different personas that we service. And I think one of the other things that's been really interesting for me to discover using SparkToro is, we make assumptions that our personas, we focus on what's different, right? What's different about the personas that we service, and how do we need to talk to them differently or reach them differently? And sometimes there's some very obvious common threads that maybe we hadn't thought of or hadn't identified. And when you start to see how similar your different audiences are, then you can market to them even more differently, because you start to realize like, hey, they're actually struggling with the same problem and they're looking to the same sources for solutions. And that makes for a totally different strategy than totally separating them and assuming they're like so different from each other.
Sure. Yeah. And there are a lot of folks who use the tool to sort of make their personas more data driven, which I think is really smart, right? I don't know about you, Jen, but I have this, I wrote a blog post about this. I have this sort of, I don't want to say anger toward, but frustration with classic persona models, because my sense is that they're very stereotyping and reductive. Okay, we saw that whatever our audience matches these sorts of gender, age, education, race and ethnicity, geography, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now we're going to craft a profile of a 44-year-old Asian American woman in Atlanta with 2 dogs and 3.5 kids, and her favorite Frappuccino order is cold. Right? And that's barely. I am barely making fun of a persona there, right? Like a lot of them look like that, right? They have those sorts of characteristics, and I very much worry that when marketers craft personas in those ways using basic demographic characteristics, even basic psychographic characteristics, that they are stereotyping, that they're going to make some serious errors in judgment, right? It could be that, maybe you saw that Asian American women are currently overrepresented in your target audience. Is that because you have been biased in the past? And are you continuing that bias by baking it into your persona model for the future? Or is it truly the case that for some reason race and ethnicity is a core reason that that your product is being marketed to these folks? And right, unless it's like, we make Black hair care products, and so we're marketing it to Black Americans. Okay, that makes reasonable sense. But beyond those very tiny use cases, I worry a lot about using demographics in these things, even age stuff, right? Here's one of my favorite examples. We talked about video games at the start of this. The fastest growing group of video gamers is women over 50. Women over 50 are the people who are most likely to adopt, most likely to become new players of video games. So what you look at the demographic and psychographic targeting of any video game, and it is terrible.
Yeah.
Now, granted, video game creators are not always the most sophisticated marketers, but I worry about that persona exercise. And so what I really like in a persona is things like, a high percentage of my audience reads these publications. Oh, super useful. That tells me a lot about how to market to them. They talk about these topics. Great. Now I know what kinds of language they use. Now I know how I can speak to them. Now I know what kinds of words and phrases will be completely over their head and which ones will really resonate because I'm using the same words and phrases that they are. I see which hashtags they follow. I know which social accounts they follow. So I have like a sense of the zeitgeist of that customer group. I like that kind of a persona far better than the, whatever, here's CFO Charlie and, he's got, here's how many dogs he has.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think it was Mark Adams from Vice about a year ago described how Ozzy Osbourne and Prince Charles would fall into the same category demographically, right?
Right.
It's a great example. So totally different worldviews, probably care about different things, but on paper, demographics, they're in the same category. And so just like you're saying, it's so important to understand actually what people care about and not just their age, their gender, their race, their ethnicity, people are so much more than that. And I think it does feel like we're getting, just as a society in business, a little bit closer to having more empathy for who people are and less
I hope
about,
so. Yeah. I mean, the sense is, I'm hoping that horrific scandals like the Basecamp thing will actually maybe upgrade our thinking in terms, maybe I shouldn't make fun of my customers' names on a list that my company maintains. That does seem like a bad idea.
Right. We're learning. We're all getting better.
Please let us get better faster.
Yes. And I just, I'm curious, what your thoughts are. Can you know too much about your customers? Is at some point, does all this information become a little bit creepy?
So I think there's two vectors on which I do have concerns about that. One is when it violates privacy that people really care about, right? So so when a lot of marketers talk about privacy, they are often talking about digital footprints and following your customer around. You visited the Spark Toro website and then, a couple of days later you saw a Spark Toro ad on Instagram. That's creepy. But it's not really problematic. There's no security violation. There's no risk of harm. Nothing bad can or will happen to you from exclusively that. However, there are lots of privacy issues in terms of, what if you could individually identify, we created this demographic ad group on Facebook and we were able to, persuade a bunch of Black Americans not to vote, which is something that, the Trump campaign did successfully in 2016, right? And this is a scary story now. What if there's privacy issues around, hey, we targeted certain vulnerable groups of people with an app that installs itself on their phone and then causes real security problems and has security flaws, and thus, people can get their credit card number or their social security info or blah, 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 blah. Those are real privacy problems. And unfortunately, those get conflated a lot in the media and press. I think that's a generally bad thing. But I do think you can, with too much hyper-personalization of marketing data, especially at the platform end of things, you can have problems. So one of the things, SparkToro does a bunch of stuff here. We don't collect, there's a lot of types of data we don't collect, and then there's types of data that we do see as we crawl these platforms and we just toss out. So for example, names. We don't, we might have, Jen, we might have your profile in our database, and we might have something like podcast host and Connecticut and stuff like that, but we do not have it associated with your name. So you can't, for example, go and see hey, those 3,000 architects, tell me all about those 3,000 architects. No. Right? We'll never show the 3,000 architects that you search for. We'll just show the aggregated information about them. And then on the other side of knowing too much outside of privacy, I think is the you target your messaging, your positioning, your advertising, your content too narrowly, and you don't appeal to as big or the correct group. And this is one of the problems that personas bring up, right? Is that you can way too narrowly focus in on this particular persona and, oh, well, I'm imagining it for CFO Charlie, and I'm sure it'll work well for him, so it'll work well for all of our other customers. And I don't think that's a great thing. I think that the creative exercise of writing for one person, right? Like let's go delight this one person. If we can delight them, we'll delight many others. I think that's reasonably decent advice in the creative world. I don't think it extends well to marketing. I think that marketers do have to recognize and have empathy for the fact that different people are different. And unless you are selling one thing to one person, like, oh, well, I'm selling a yacht to, whatever, Bill Gates. Okay, well, fine. You don't have to do a whole lot of marketing except like, are you recently divorced and dominating the, what is it, vaccine distribution around the world? This yacht is for you. That might be fine, but every other marketer on the planet needs to consider that their group of people are made up of a diverse cohort of individuals and not get fall overly in love with their singular persona that they might have used to reduce them to a one person idea.
Yeah, that's really tricky. I mean, not to say that like positioning isn't tricky in general, but then to make sure that you're really like segmenting people appropriately and truly speaking to them in a way that they will understand, like that is a big challenge for a lot of marketers.
Yeah, I don't think it is that bad, but I do feel like there's a sense of like, oh, I want to speak individually to each of my customer targets, as opposed to I want to find what's shared between them, like you said, and create something resonant based on that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I say this on a lot of episodes, but I really mean it. Like I could probably go on for like another hour on this conversation, but I think we should move on. And for if anybody needs me, I'm just going to be talking to Rand for another hour private. I want to thank you so much for joining the show today. This has been a really fun conversation, and I can't thank you enough.
Oh my gosh, it has been my pleasure to join, Jen. And I hope you and your listeners, if you have any challenges or issues with SparkToro or marketing questions or whatever, I am happy to help. I'm Rand at SparkToro.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for listening and joining us. Please rate and review us on your favorite network, and don't forget to share the show. On next week's episode, I'll be joined by Maher Beltaifa from Pharesia, one of our Vidi winners, and I will see you then.